What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Built in Buffalo Live. We are here every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. I am Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luka. Luka, how are you doing tonight?
Ooh, you threw in a little last name there,
Yeah,
Josh.
you
Wow.
know,
Spicing things up all of a sudden now that we have officially hit the end of the season a little too quickly. I'm doing okay. It was a nice week of reflection, also, aka a busy week where my mind couldn't just wander on what had happened this past weekend. So doing good. It's gonna be an interesting show for sure. We've talked a little bit throughout the week how we want to do this, and I'm curious to see what we're about to put out there tonight.
yeah, and we have a special guest on with us tonight, too. We have the owner and founder of Built in Buffalo, Dave Myers, with us tonight. And it's exciting to have him with us because I think, like a lot of us, myself, Luca, Dave included, we're all processing what we just saw 5 days ago at a little bit different pace. Some of us are still really angry. Some of us are like really, really sad. And I think a lot of fans can relate to that. So I think having another voice in the room is going to be helpful. Dave, thanks for hopping on tonight.
Yeah, I've been trying to get on with you guys for a while, so I'm glad we could do it. Unfortunate circumstances that I was able to join the show this week. It's funny because my wife was just asking me what we were going to do on Sunday, and I actually got a little irritated because typically my Sundays are filled with Bills football. So for the first time since September, I don't have any plans on Sunday, and it's a little concerning. But yeah, I think this is a good show. Like Luca was saying, in our group chats, because I'm sure everybody's in group chats with their Bills friends. I've been going ham all week, and I told the guys that I was going to try to tone it down a bit because I don't want to come on here because their show is really mellow and it's really well put together, and I didn't want to come on here and just blow up on stuff. So I'm going to try to control myself. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, we are controlled, but we're here for whatever the needs are. And just like you guys in chat, Jacob, what's up? I see you in chat. Roy, you say you're glad you're like your job made the week better. We love the fact that you love your job, Roy, and we're glad that you're hanging out with us tonight. And then Bev says, "Hi guys from Ontario, Canada. What's going on, Bev? Hope you're having a good Friday night tonight. Let us know how you guys are doing in chat. This was an abrupt end to our season. I don't think it's surprising that the Bills lost to the Bengals. It felt like a 50-50 game going in, but the way they lost really made it challenging for a lot of us to understand what's going on. So, with my guy Luca, with Dave, I want to just kick it around our group here. We've had a week to process. Luca and I went live the night it happened. You may have seen me. I had a little bit of a rage moment that I put out a clip of. You can find on Built in Buffalo YouTube. It's still there. I'm sorry, Built in Buffalo Facebook. You can find the full episode on Built in Buffalo Podcast Network. But what I want to hear about tonight is how are we doing? Because we've had time to let this result breathe. We've heard from Sean McDermott. We've heard from Brandon Beane. The reality has set in. The Bills' 2022 season is over. It ended sooner than most of us thought it would. So, Luca, I'm going to start with you. Now that you've had time to process all of this, what's the number one thing on your mind right now when it comes to the Buffalo Bills?
This week kind of allowed me to get to a mind space here tonight where I kind of reflected on everything that I felt about this team going into the season. And then as it progressed, where did my mind bring me now to this point? And it kept coming back to one singular point. And I think myself included, I believe even you and everyone else, we found ourselves really wanting to believe in the hype in the preseason, feeling that this team could finally be that one to get to the peak, get to the top, finally do what we wanted all these other teams in previous years to do. And unfortunately, what that did is just kind of disguise or blind us the reality that beyond a couple of really good blue chips, kind of in a similar weird way, like what we talked about down with the Rams, there's a couple blue chips, and you got Josh Allen, Von Miller, but beyond that, maybe these guys aren't quite as good as we thought. The roster as a whole isn't as, what we love to say, as deep as we thought it was. And what we were doing was instead thinking it was as deep as it was due to the projections and what we hoped Gabe Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, all these other guys could then step up into. But when you don't have a known, that's a hard thing to do. Or what I really mean by that is we shouldn't find ourselves prisoners of the moment and prisoners of hype and believe that it's just the reality of it. Something that you project is not something that's real. It's not fiscal. It's not something you possess. You know, Ed Oliver is not Aaron Donald. He's not already a dominant interior defensive lineman. We just hoped he would finally take that step. Gabe Davis was never a wide receiver 2 until this season, and we hoped he would maybe turn those flashes he has shown into that molded perfect product at wide receiver 2, and it just never progressed. And the reality is it kind of centered me a little bit with my fandom, and it brought me to a place where I am now promising myself, which obviously it's easy to say here late January, but I am promising myself moving forward that I will not get into the hype, buy into the fandom, buy into everything, and just try to be a little bit more objective and real with where my team stands, because they are not at par with the Bengals. They just aren't. I think I saw in the comments somewhere, we just weren't up to snuff or something to that effect. And it's just like, that's the reality of it. That's what it felt like this past Sunday. We are just not a team as deep, as talented as the one that we were playing against that came into Orchard Park and just put on a good old whooping. And that's the reality of it. If you would have told these fans in the preseason that would happen, you would find it so crazy, or you're hard to believe, because we are the deepest team in the league, and that's not the reality of it. And we just let that hype and that, projection instead of reality blind us into what that real thing was.
So I might be playing the role of therapist a little bit tonight. And I'm going to start with what your point is, Luca, because I feel what you're saying. I think at the beginning of the season, you and I did show after show where we were saying this team is not only super talented on the high end, but they are deep. They have guys that could be ones on other teams that are 2s and 3s on this team. And I think as we saw when they lost Von Miller, when they lost Daquan Jones, some of those backups that we thought could start for other teams looked like they shouldn't even be on the field for the Bills against the backups of the Cincinnati Bengals. I will say, though, the challenging part of this offseason is going to be the taste that last game left in our mouth, because that is our last impression of the team, and we have to wait until September again for them to play meaningful games. So it's always going to make us think that maybe that is what the team was. We all need to remember that was by far the worst game this team played all year, and they just picked the absolute worst time to do it. But Dave, to Luca's point, I think there were signs after the bye as the season went on, even when the Bills were on their winning streak, that maybe this team wasn't as strong as we thought, and they were squeaking out wins against inferior opponents. How do you feel about the overall talent on this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tweeted out a couple days ago that after the bye week, something happened during the bye week, because they came out on fire against Green Bay, and then the second half just looked uncomfortable. And everybody wants to talk about how they thought Josh was bored and he was just kind of playing around. And I think you've even brought up moments where there's games like the game against the Bears where he was just doing anything he wanted because he knew he could, and they had enough talent to get away with it. They just weren't beating teams like they were in the beginning of the year. You have the Steelers game, the Titans game, the opening game against the Rams. They were absolutely taking teams to the woodshed, no pun intended. And it just felt like we were escaping a lot of times. There was a lot of games against inferior talent, and I think that's why the Bills ultimately prevailed. The Lions game, that comeback there, the Vikings debacle. There was a lot of stuff that was telling throughout that last 8-9 games, but we as Bills fans, I think, were kind of blinded by the fact that they were still winning. And then you throw in the blizzard, and then you throw in the DeMar Hamlin situation. So there was a lot of stuff that was against this team already, and then they had to go out there and perform. And I think, Luka nailed it. We put a lot of pressure on guys that we had kind of, they pulled the wool over our eyes, I guess I would say. Like, we were all enamored with Gabe Davis's 200 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Chiefs. Oh my God, he's going to explode this year, right? He is that guy. He's that, that piece to go with Diggs. And then McKenzie blows up in camp, and then all of a sudden he can't catch anything. And we were all enamored with Ed Oliver, and we got Jordan Phillips back, and then just stuff started to fall apart as the season progressed. And Bean even said in his, the presser the other day that, guys weren't playing up to their potential because they were dinged up. And to your point, Josh, we talked all off season about how deep this roster was. And it proved that it's really not, because injuries happen to every team. There's teams out there that were playing a lot of games and winning games without starting caliber positions out there. So I don't know. I think what really kind of, irritates me the most is that we can't go anywhere on social media and say a damn thing.
Yeah.
Because what everybody was saying for the last 2 months is, oh my God, the Bills escaped with another win. The Bills are paper champions. It looked like that was the case on Sunday. They couldn't do anything right. The team just felt like there was no emotion. It felt like there wasn't one guy that was going to make a play, this, spark, get the momentum going, because momentum in football is a hell of a thing. And there just wasn't that moment. I thought maybe for a second after Milano got the sack that, okay, he's thumping his chest, like, let's go, here we go. Even when Josh scored his rushing touchdown, I'm like, all right, we're down by 7. We've been here before. We were down 17 to the Ravens, but there was just no desire. And I've gotten a lot of slack on Twitter because I talk about the coaching, and I understand these are grown men that get paid multi-million dollars a year to perform at a high level. But I feel like at some point, someone needs to do something in those coaching rooms and, it at halftime somewhere or something, saying, hey, what the hell are we doing? Like, we worked all week for this. We've worked all season for this. Brandon Beane's mantra, let's win the division. Okay, step 1, got it. Step 2, let's have home games in the playoffs. We want them to come here. Okay, we got that. And then it just seems like that all kind of went out the window. So I guess in a roundabout way, and I said I wasn't going to rant, but in a roundabout way about the roster, I don't think it's as deep as we thought it was. And I think there needs to be some hard looks at some of these players. And I think that Brandon Beane absolutely has to look at the roster that he's built and think that there might be some hard decisions to be made. Now, I'm not saying do anything crazy like trade some starting caliber players, but some of these guys that are on contracts that coming up this year, we may need to revisit some of this stuff. And it's going to be, this might be one of the most crucial off seasons that the Bills have had in a long time. And that's, are we ascending still, or are we descending? Have we peaked? Did we peak in 2020 in the AFC Championship game? So I think a lot of questions are going to hopefully be answered as things start to progress and get laid out, as the weeks and months go, into training camp.
Oh, it's absolutely one of the most critical off seasons they've faced, because not only do they have Josh Allen's major cap hits starting to hit in now and really weigh down the salary cap, they no longer have 2 all-pro safeties on a bargain basement discount. They no longer have Tre'Davious White, Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds, Taron Johnson on their rookie deals. A few of those guys have already been paid. Tremaine Edmonds, they're going to have to make a decision about here. It's going to come down to scheme. For a lot of Leslie Frazier's tenure with Sean McDermott, they've been able to field a defense of 10, 11 plus level starters and really just rely on the basics, the fundamentals, not worrying about scheme. It's more about, Jimmys and Joes over X's and O's. And what we saw on Sunday was the Bengals, Jimmys and Joes were better than us, but man, the X's and O's really were better than us too. And Dave, I know you're an all 22 guy. I like to go back and rewatch the games. I will be honest, I have not gone back and rewatched much of this game besides a few things that I wanted to kind of see for myself. But I've seen some questions in here about halftime adjustments. And I know that's kind of an easy thing to say when your team gets blown out, was where are the halftime adjustments? But I am telling you all, the Bills did not counter anything the Bengals were doing. And as basic as they had 3 backup offensive linemen out there, and the Bills defensive linemen seemed like they were obsessed with getting a pass rush going, and the Bengals just used that to their advantage, let those guys get upfield, and there were wide open running lanes. Milano and Edmonds and Taron Johnson were swallowed up by offensive linemen who weren't being held off by the Bills defensive line. And then when you look at the way that the Bengals just ate up the Bills zone on defense, and there was just no resistance. We can talk about the off coverage on that 1 3rd and 4 that everybody's seen the screenshot of. But then on the other side of the ball, the Bengals absolutely had Ken Dorsey in a box. Pro Football Focus had the Bengals of having 67% perfect coverage, which is an insane stat. So for those that don't know, perfect coverage is when every player in coverage either gets a passing grade or a neutral grade on that play. 67% of the time, the Bengals had perfect coverage. It was the second highest score by any team this season against a Bills offense that was fully healthy. Not only were they winning one-on-one matchups, but they knew the plays that were coming. I think, Luka, it was an all-around embarrassing day for the players, and I think it was a very embarrassing day for the coaching staff.
This just felt where you would want something to be up the coaching staff sleeve. You would want or expect them to maybe have an answer after getting that brief, very brief dry run against Cincinnati, where they actually had success early on offensively against the Bengals, but then also they were able to see how flawed the defensive plan was, that maybe they would change a lot so that the Bengals would have no idea what's going on, because it seemed in that game, I'll be honest, the very limited amount that we saw from that Monday night game that ended up not counting, it seemed like the Bengals knew exactly what the Bills wanted to do. The only times the Bills offensively moved the ball was Josh Allen running down the field and maybe one or two passes to Diggs. Beyond that, it was like nothing was happening in that one singular drive, and that the defensive coverage in that game was actually pretty good. It was spot on. It just translated right over into this game. Every snap, it just seemed like Josh's first and second read not there. Coverage down the field, completely perfect. However they needed to shift their pressure, whatever they needed to do, wherever they needed to bring the pressure from, it was always perfect. And to me, that is just meaning you are way too easy to predict. You are just so simple, or whatever you're trying to scheme and develop as an offensive game plan, just thinking of this side of the ball at least, it's on tape. It's out there for everyone. I don't think the Bengals would be alone in this. They had the personnel to achieve what they did, but there are other teams that probably would have found similar success because it just seemed too predictable, especially based on that stat that you presented, where 2/3 of the game, it's perfect coverage. That is alarming and a half. If you consider yourself a great offense and a great team, you should not be predictable to the point where the opposition can predict 2/3 of the time what you're going to do and have exactly the right answer for it. That is really, really not good. Now, when you switch the side of the ball here and you look at our defense versus their offense, it was almost a polar opposite. It was just like there was no idea what Cincinnati was going to do. And Joe Burrow could have probably played with no eyes open. He could have hit Jamar Chase half the time because there was no one around him for 10 yards or whatever the play might be. It was just perfectly timed. I honestly would just think that they were tapped into the mics or something like that, which is absolutely not the case. The Bengals didn't do anything wrong. I'd be stunned if that's the case. I'm not accusing them there. I'm just pointing out a fact where it was just that easy for them. You would think they were in the huddle nonstop. You would think they were in those meetings with the Bills staff on what they wanted to achieve, because that's how easy it was for them. And that is just insanely alarming. And that comes down to coaching, game planning, everything like that. You're not putting your team in a position to win from start to finish. You are not going to achieve any sort of success if you don't have a game plan that the opposition already knows about. Like, it's just mind blowing to me how easy it was for the Bengals in all facets of the game. And the Bills just had no answer, nothing up their sleeve, nothing they could do that could maybe create success out of nothing beyond, hey, Josh, just go be Superman. And then, pray to God that our defense can luck out and get a turnover or two based on the Bengals screwing up, not because they created it. It was just mind blowing that the coaching staff kind of put them in that position and had that, second half. If you want to call that, like, they didn't make any second half adjustments, halftime adjustments. It's tough to say. I just think the Bengals put him in a blender. The Bengals put Leslie Frazier and Ken Dorsey in a blender beyond any they just didn't know what to do. They were so deep in that quicksand I talked about pregame for hoping that the others are actually going back to the Dolphins game. You want to put someone in quicksand. You want them to feel like they're over their head and they have no idea what to do. The Bengals in one half of football put both Leslie Frazier and Ken Dorsey over their head in quicksand, and they had no clue what to do. That second half looked like a team that had no instruction to them. And it's just like, hey, just do something because we don't know what to call. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to change anything because we don't even know what we're seeing in the first place. It was Sam Darnold seeing ghosts out there. It was just unbelievable. The Bengals deserve all the credit in the world because it was an absolute perfect game plan. And the Bills coaching staff deserves all the hate, because it's like, what are we doing? Look, injuries and all that. Dave pointed it out. Every team has injuries, and you have the players you have available. And this is the roster that Bean and everyone has put together to put out there. And it actually, offensively wise, was pretty dang healthy. And yet you're finding zero success in a vital moment of the season. That's inexcusable at a coaching level.
I do want to talk about Brandon Bean because I think he's gotten some heat this week, and I think rightfully so. I want to have that conversation a little bit, but we are on coaching right now. Charlene asked a question. TJ had a similar question in chat about the coordinators. And I think we can all agree Sean McDermott's not going anywhere, and I don't think he should go anywhere. There's not a coach out there, maybe absent of Sean Payton, that really screams obvious upgrade. Let's not forget the fact that Sean McDermott's had the Bills in the playoffs for the last 4 seasons. They've won 3 straight AFC East championships. They've been in the divisional round of the playoffs, the second round of the playoffs, 3 straight years. So there is a floor for sustained success there, even though we haven't enjoyed the ending. And with Sean Payton, you would have to send a pick to the Saints and give him organizational control so you could kiss goodbye Brandon Bean and McDermott. I don't think a lot of fans would be willing to do that or should be willing to do that at this point in time. I don't think we're at that point. If another season goes by with similar results, maybe that conversation gets a little heated up. But I do think there is a conversation to be had on both coordinators, Leslie Frazier and Ken Dorsey. Opposite ends of the spectrum. Leslie Frazier has been here all 6 years with Sean McDermott and has had really solid success, especially in the regular season. The last 4 years, his defense has ranked in the top 6 of defenses in the NFL. Ken Dorsey, first year play caller, his statistics mirrored a lot of what Brian Daboll did in 2021. The Bills were one of the higher rated offenses this year, but when the eyeballs take over and they start watching the plays, there were no layups. There was very minimal motion. The Bills ranked in the bottom half of the league in motion. And you just saw a lot of free rushers coming at Josh that seemed to be more accounted for in previous years. So, Dave, I'm going to start with you. Where are you at with Dorsey and Frazier? Do either both deserve to be on the hot seat? And if so, is there one in your mind that seat should be a little warmer?
Yeah, I mean, how much time we got?
As much as you need.
So Ken Dorsey made me miss Brian Daboll a lot this year. And we used to get, as Bills fans, used to get upset with Brian Daboll because he never ran the ball, right? We used to get mad that there was just some games when you're like, what are we doing? But he did always make halftime adjustments, to Luka's point. There just doesn't seem to be a script for Ken Dorsey. I don't think he looks at game plans individually as opposed to having a different script every week. I think he's got play sheets, and I think he dials up things that he thinks will work based off of previous success. Now, 3rd and 2, why are you throwing 40 yards downfield? I don't understand that. That's something that I think we're all a little upset about. But I think we kind of didn't look at this situation with Daboll leaving it in the head coaching job with the Giants and then Dorsey coming in. We thought it was going to be a smooth transition because Dorsey had been here, right? He was Josh's QB coach. He was the passing game coordinator last year. So we thought, okay, a guy that's familiar with Josh, instead of bringing in somebody from outside the organization, Josh vouched for him. He said, this is the guy that I absolutely want. And we thought it was going to be, maybe there will be some hiccups here and there, but we thought it was going to be a smooth transition. And I think it couldn't be any further from the truth. I think that there was times when Dorsey was in over his head. I think there was times when he was not capable of making adjustments. There was some good game planning, like, for instance, the Bears game. We knew that they can't stop the run, so what'd they do? The Bills ran all over the Bears because they could. But then there's times like the Miami game in the playoffs, the wild card game, we're just chucking. Josh is just chucking 50-yard bombs all game, and that seemed like that was the only play that was called on every set of downs. Was, and good for the Bills because I mean, Josh completed a handful of those, and some could have been caught. There was some drops in there. One by Shakir, one went through Diggs' hands, one Davis dropped, and it's just, I don't know. And our guy Akeem has said this a lot this season because I was under the impression that there may be a time when, like Lucas said, that there was some stuff that was tucked away. There was like a game plan that when it's the right moment, we're going to unveil all this stuff that we haven't done with motion and using the slot receivers and things like that. And that just never happened. And I think, like Lucas said, I think when Dorsey gets frazzled, I don't think he responds and has that factor in his brain where he can be like, okay, we need to either get back to basics and do some easy things for Josh. Let's get him some easy completions so that he can get back in rhythm, get back involved in the game. Because, with Dayball, he would, if the game was either it was a close game or it seemed like it might have been slipping out of control, he would get Josh going. He'd get some designed runs. He would have Josh do Josh things. And Dorsey just never seemed to have a plan that was, okay, we're playing this defense. This is the game plan we're going to go with. Okay, we're playing this defense. This is the game plan this week. It seemed like it was just, we would just dial up stuff that just wasn't working continuously. And I think he was just overwhelmed. Now, as far as, do I think we should get rid of Dorsey? No, because then we're starting from scratch. I mean, we're for a team with 172 slot receivers.
That's so true.
And so I don't want to go off the rails because so help me God, if I don't see Khalil Shakir start game one lined up in the slot, I'm going to lose my ever loving mind next year, and I'm going to be horrible. But we could probably get back to that and talk about some more in-depth roster players.
Yeah, roster construction.
I mean, watching Isaiah Hodgins score touchdowns, I love, but I hate at the same time because we have Jay Kumaro and IR instead of having Isaiah Hodgins. Anyways, so I don't think that going away from Dorsey necessarily would be the right call. I think that there needs to be some continuity, or else we get, McDermott's going to have to find someone else that he can trust to come in here. We lost Frank Reich to, he went to the Panthers. That was somebody I thought was going to be a savior, but Leslie Frazier, I have a completely different stance on Leslie Frazier. And I posted some stats a couple days ago on Twitter. He's given up 107 points in the last 3 playoff losses. That is unacceptable. Now, the Bills have, yes, but Leslie Frazier is in charge of that defense. And if you go back and you look even further, he's given up 450 yards per game. That's for a top 6 defense the last 5 years. That's unacceptable in the big game. Now, I understand there's Patrick Mahomes in there. There's Joe Burrow in there. Actually, Patrick Mahomes twice and Joe Burrow once. So you're going up against all-world quarterbacks, but that's not an excuse. Like, there's times throughout the season where we've seen the game plan worked. We played the Chiefs, and for weeks after that game against the Chiefs during the regular season, people were just absolutely tickled to death with how he was able to scheme that secondary to confuse Patrick Mahomes. And Von Miller was coming off the edge and all this stuff. And it just... When is enough enough? When is the same thing, enough? What's the phrase? You try to keep doing something over and over and try to get the same results.
Yeah.
What's that saying? You keep doing the same thing and trying to get the same results. Like insanity, right? I mean, now Leslie Frazier's a really good defensive coordinator. I think he'd be a really good DBs coach somewhere in the league. What have we seen from a defensive-minded head coach and a defensive coordinator who's put out a top unit for the last 5-6 years since he's been here? It seems every year, once crunch time comes, we're escaping the first round. You look back to 2020, we escaped the Colts. That was a really close game. He had a really good game plan for Lamar in the divisional round, and then the Chiefs happened. Right. And then this year, the Dolphins, backup quarterback, they scored 31 points on us. So I don't know. I mean, everyone wants to say, well, it's the players. They got to perform and it's this and it's that. But like Lucas said, if you look at the game plan, what were we trying to accomplish with 3 backup offensive linemen? What were we trying to accomplish? Like, do things to mask, whatever's not your strong suit. If you can't get a pass rush going, you got to make adjustments and figure out other ways. They lined up in the second half. The Bills knew they were going to run the ball, and they put up almost 200 yards rushing. The Bills knew that they were going to run the ball, and they couldn't stop it. They just couldn't stop it. And how many times have we seen a top 5 defense over the years line up against teams, and they're rushing teams, the Patriots game in the wind, and then the Colts game last year. And they just ran the ball because they knew the Bills couldn't stop it. And it's just things like that irritate me. Like, be a complete unit. Like, I don't know. I could probably go on for another hour on Leslie Frazier. I think it's time to move on. I think that McDermott needs to have a hard talk with Leslie Frazier and be like, look, we're getting so close We're getting so close, but we have the talent right now that we need to be, getting to the promised land. We're hosting games in January. We need to figure out what's not working. So I don't know. I mean, what's your guys' opinion? I want to know your guys' opinions on Leslie Frazier, because I know that you put out a video today, Josh. You and Stokes put out a really good video earlier today, and I mean, when is so? Let me give you one more example, and then I'll get off my soapbox. The Kansas City Chiefs in 2020 went to the Super Bowl and got absolutely throttled by Tampa Bay, right? So what did the Kansas City Chiefs do? They went and they released 3 starting offensive linemen. And everybody said, well, oh my God, they're in cap hell. What are they doing? They can't sign. Brett Veach figured it out and signed 3 new offensive linemen. They went to the AFC Championship game the next year. It can be done with a winning team and a winning franchise and a winning roster. You have to take that step to say that this is not good enough. And that starts with Brandon Beane, goes down to Sean McDermott, and so on and so on. And that's it. I'll get off my soapbox.
Sorry about that. I was just wowing the people in my room here. That's by myself. I think this is going to be a very soapbox episode as it goes, because I think we're all still processing what's going on. You did mention YouTube. For those of you watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We have some exclusive YouTube content coming this off season. We put out a video on Leslie Frazier today, whether we think he should stay or go. We have a Ken Dorsey video dropping tomorrow. We broke down Brandon Beane's press conference earlier in the week. And we're going to be putting up clips from our shows like this one here. If you're not able to see the entire live show, we'll put up some highlight clips as we go along to kind of keep you guys up, because we know it's the off season for you too. And you may not have the energy or the interest in taking in all the stuff. So we'll try to narrow it down for you and give you a little too long didn't read version. If you just keep it on Built in Buffalo, you'll be up to date on all Bill stuff. But with that said, I am a little bit more down on Frazier than I am on Dorsey. With Dorsey, it's one, first-time play caller. I think there is room to grow, and I understand the criticism, but I'll also say I read an article at Jets X Factor that I'm going to be bringing up tomorrow in the video that's dropping on Built in Buffalo. And Dorsey actually rated very favorably in a lot of metrics for offensive coordinators that take out the skill of the quarterback. So it doesn't matter if your quarterback is Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, or if your quarterback is, I'm trying to think, Jordan Love. Okay, so I didn't want to insult anybody's quarterback, so I used a backup. It doesn't matter if it's Zach Wilson. It's all about play design. And Dorsey was one of the best coordinators in the league at designing wide open receivers, which is weird for a lot of us to think of, because watching the game, it felt like there were a lot of contested passes there. The one issue that Dorsey had was free rushers coming at his quarterback. He ranked in the bottom of the league in that. But overall, I think there's enough encouraging signs there. Plus, especially with Frank Reich taking the Carolina job, I just don't know that there's a better option out there that is worth starting over with a new offensive system. I think get some weapons around Josh, get some offensive linemen that can block, and then I think run it back with Dorsey in year 2. Now, Frazier's a different story. You mentioned he did have the good game against Baltimore. I'll throw the Houston game in against Deshaun Watson as a good game for Frazier. He can't make Saran Neal and Matt Milano make a sack when they're in the backfield. But you're right. The way the season has ended the last 3 years have been an abomination when it comes to defense. And that's where I think the Bills could use a new set of eyes. And I have an issue with, one, the scheme. I feel like it's just so reliant on guys playing their roles, playing the scheme, and trusting that play to work, instead of what you saw from the Bengals was throwing the kitchen sink at the Bills. The Bengals had a rookie second-round cornerback in Cam Taylor-Britt and Eli Apple, who was a meme, and they held the Bills to 10 points because the coordinator was just throwing everything he could at them, and they couldn't adjust. The Bills very much just line up, play their defense, and expect to win that way. And that works great in the regular season when you're going against the Bears, the Lions, and the Browns. But when you get into the money games against Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow, you need to bring a little bit more to the table. So I like the idea. Steve Wilkes is sitting out there. He has some familiarity with Sean McDermott. And a name I brought up to Luka on Bill's chat over the weekend is Vic Fangio. And the reason I like him is when you look at the defense under Frazier and McDermott, the lifeblood of that defense has been the safety combination with Hyde and Poyer. That defense has been built around having those safeties who are interchangeable, that can line up one-way pre-snap, change the design post-snap, confuse the quarterback, and really force mistakes that way. That's going away. I feel very confident in saying that we're not going to have the Hyde-Poyer combination next year. I think we'll have one of them, most likely Hyde. You also look at the fact that they drafted Kaiir Elam in the first round last year. I think the Bills need to adapt more man defense in their scheme. Kaiir Elam is very good at man, and I would like to see that shift there. You don't know what's going to go on with Tremaine Edmonds. I want a fresh set of eyes on this defense, and Fangio has a history with Von Miller also. That can't be denied. I don't think he's in the conversation. I don't actually predict Leslie Frazier gets fired. I'm a little less than 50-50 on it, but if he does, I would think it would be Steve Wilks. But I'm with you, Dave. I think it is time for a change at defensive coordinator. Luka, where do you fall on either coordinator?
Yeah, I come back to the point of it just feels stale. And so there's a point in a lot of, it's not even just football. There's just a lot of sports where you need a change of voice. You need something different in the room to drive points, drive a message, drive a game plan, drive a scheme, whatever you want to say and paint as this is why we're doing it. You need a different voice in there. And I just think that it might be a product of Leslie Frazier's voice, and what he wants to achieve is falling on deaf ears. I just think there's something going on right now where it's become stale. And unless you play an absolute perfect game, all 11 on the field, as you kind of hinted to or pointed out there, it's just not going to work anymore. And maybe the effort level even drops a bit because it just seems like something is missing. And it's not even necessarily as obvious as it might be. It might not even just be as simple as we need to change this scheme. It just might be as something as broad as Leslie Frazier has run his course in the position that he has, and they need to bring in someone else that is just going to drive a different message, have a different voice in the room to kind of re-energize or just revamp whatever is going on the defensive side of the ball. I actually kind of really am at a coin flip with Leslie Frazier. I think that discussion is being had in the front office. I think that they're really evaluating every individual in this process. You know, people might feel like, oh, because a, secondaries coach, safeties coach, whatever, has been let go, they've already kind of moved past the coordinators. I don't think that's the case. You just don't brashly fire a coordinator unless, you had a cataclysmic season and you're just clearing house anyways. So maybe that person was just first there because they were the first one in the office for whatever reason. I don't think you generally see that. You want to make it an educated decision. You want to make sure that cool heads prevail. The entire situation's evaluated. And from there, you understand not only what you are doing with Leslie Frazier in this case, but then you also already have whatever that plan is lined up, essentially. If that is Steve Wilks, if that is a Vic Fangio, if that is anyone else out there in the world to fill that role, you already kind of have that idea that is where you're going to come in, because you can't afford that mistake of just kind of going to the open market to fill that role. That is not something you can do with this organization, with the goals that they hopefully have. I mean, I say hopefully too, because sometimes you hear Bean talk and stuff, and it's like they say the right thing, but also it's just like now it's starting to even fall on deaf ears with me, where it's like, do they really understand what they need to do in order to hit those goals? Because once in a while you hear what they say and you're like, it's all cool what you're saying, but do you understand what it seems like to the vast majority of, and I'm not talking fans either, it's, major media, people who have been in the business, stuff like that, where they're like, this is clearly a problem, and yet you seem to be going a little bit more tame than what others that have been in a similar position to you would be addressing this. And I'm not saying that, again, I'm not piling on Frazier here. I'm pretty sure it's pretty 50-50 in that front office, but maybe they do need to be aggressive. Maybe they do need to take Josh's suggestion here and just go blow it up completely, go with the Vic Fangio style defense and just really change things up. I personally would love to see kind of a morph of the two ideologies. This is just me. This is just my headspace only. This is where I come from on this whole situation. I personally do think Leslie Frazier is falling on deaf ears. I think there's something going on where he's just become a body in the building. And all of a sudden, it's just hard to listen to the same person over and over for now 5 years. And you just need a change of voice. A lot of veteran presence now starting to get there with youth that's trying to develop. You've kind of seen the same voice, and now you need to move on from there and just get them to drive forward with someone else kind of running the ship there. So maybe it's a Steve Wilks, but then I do love what you brought up, Josh. maybe you need to introduce more man into this, because you've kind of drafted personnel now that have put you in a position where maybe that's the way to do it. It's a fascinating thing, because would this defense look differently in man beyond the fact that they're running more man than zone? No one knows yet, because you just don't see it. But maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe that's the thing you need to mix up here. Give Micah Hyde, if he's the safety coming back, a different thing to pay attention to and focus on. And maybe that drives the focus even further. Maybe that helps whoever ends up being the safety next to him. Hopefully it's not Jaquan Johnson, but whoever that individual is, hopefully maybe changing a man or something like that will, elevate that secondary partner to Micah Hyde. You don't know what you have because you haven't tried it yet, but clearly what you have in the building, what you have there, has fallen just completely stale. It's worth, if you have stale bread in the cupboard, Josh, you throw it out. You're not eating that stuff. You're not going to try to make it work. You're going to throw it out.
Depends how hungry I am.
Fair point. But
be honest,
if it's stale, you're throwing it out and you're going to get a new one. You're going to try something, maybe even try something different. If you see a nice flashy thing at the grocery store, you're not just going to try to rejuvenize this stale bread sitting there. That's just ridiculous. Do something different, change it up, because clearly what is working right now is not actually working. It's just completely flat.
Roy Collins, how much did we miss Daquan Jones in that game? Roy, a lot. A lot. I want to give my guy Luka some credit, because last March we were doing a Bills chat episode, and this was during the wave of free agency where the Bills signed Tim Settle, Daquan Jones, and we were just kind of going through the names, and Luka right off the bat was like, this Daquan Jones is not a nothing signing. This could change our defense. And I think you even said on the air, he's everything that we thought Star Lotulelei was. And I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, that's cool. And then, yeah, like they missed him a ton. I don't know if they win the game if Daquan Jones plays. That'd be a lofty statement, but I'm with you. He's been a find from Brandon Beane. Speaking of Brandon Beane, I want to have a Brandon Beane discussion with you guys right on the other side of this little break here, where we're going to mention our title sponsor, West Her. We are proudly sponsored by Western New York's #1 auto dealer. Over 30 locations to get you in the right vehicle today. Become a part of West Her today. All right, guys. The Bills general manager, Brandon Beane, has been a hero in this city. He brought us Josh Allen. He brought us Stephon Diggs. He brought us Von Miller. He brought us playoff appearances and division championships, things that were just a non-thing that we could even imagine for the last 2 decades before his arrival. And I think there's been a lot of roses thrown at him, and he's gotten a lot of praise. But as you kind of peel back what's been going on with this team, one of the very first things that came out about this team after the playoff loss was, when you look back at the last 4 drafts, starting with 2019, the year after they drafted Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmonds, starting with Ed Oliver, the Bills have not drafted a Pro Bowler in the last 4 drafts. Now, I saw some folks on Twitter saying, well, the Pro Bowl's a joke anyway. Miss me with that kind of analogy. And look, okay, we get it. You don't have to use a straw man argument here to try to defend the Bills. If you want to, go look at the names and make a case for any one of those players that should be in the Pro Bowl. I will make it super easy for you. Maybe Tyler Bass if Justin Tucker has a bad season. That's about it. Maybe Dawson Knox, but seriously, we live in a world where Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews exists. There's not a Pro Bowler in those 4 drafts. So whether you want to make fun of the Pro Bowl or not, I'm not a fan of the Pro Bowl. This draft classes of Brandon Beane from 2019 through present has not developed into any kind of star on this team, and that is concerning. In fairness, with the exception of 2019, the Bills have been picking very late in their drafts. So that is one thing to consider. Now, when it comes to Brandon Beane, some of the picks he's been giving, particularly on defense, were the focal point of what went wrong against the Bengals. You talk about Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa, 2 second-round picks. You talk about Greg Rousseau and Ed Oliver, 2 first-round picks. Tim Settle, a guy they invested free agent dollars in, could not manhandle or even win their matchup with 3 backup offensive linemen on an already average offensive line that was the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think it was a tough look for Brandon Beane. He did give his press conference. He took some accountability for that. And I just want to ask both of you right now. Obviously, none of us are going to say we want Brandon Beane to be fired, but I do think a conversation needs to be had about the lack of development of some of these players, whether they're picking the wrong players. That's more of a Brandon Beane issue, Or are they picking the right players and there's a development issue? And I'll point to the fact that you look at what they did with Cody Ford, where it's like, hey, you're going to play a series and then Ty Nseki's going to play a series. You look at what they did with Ed Oliver. They rotate all their defensive linemen. So maybe it was hidden in this with Ed Oliver and Rousseau, where you're going to play a couple series and then we're going to put Star Latulele out there. Or with Greg Rousseau, you're going to play a couple series and then Epinesa is going to go out there. And then Kyer Elam was playing behind Xavier Rhodes this year. And I feel myself getting really mad right now. And I'm going to have to kick it over to somebody else because the Xavier Rhodes thing is just frustrating when you have this player in Kyer Elam who, when you watch the film, is ascending every week. He has elite athleticism, elite ball skills, and literally just needs reps on the field to unlock his potential. And you're holding those reps back from him for a practice squad washed up cornerback in Xavier Rhodes and Dane Jackson. It didn't make sense to me, but I'm going to breathe. Let's all do it together. And Luka, how are you feeling about Brandon Beane at this point in time?
Brandon Beane is only as good as the arsenal he kind of employs around him. So I'm going to use that point right now to emphasize I am not overly upset with Brandon Beane. Brandon Beane is the final say, of course. He is the final person on all personnel decisions. Him and McDermott, I imagine, also has that partial final say on personnel decisions. But he seems to have a staff built around him that maybe needs to be brought into question. You know, you have your senior director of pro scouting and Malik, Malik Boyd. Sorry.
Malik Boyd,
almost said Malik Willis, and it's not him, but he has
I hope not.
But Malik Boyd, senior pro scouting, you have these other scouts out there, and it just seems like these guys are missing what the team's image, identity, and what they need out of each position, because I think AJ Epinesa is a fascinating and focal point I kind of really want to go on. I know it touches close to home with you, Josh, just because he is from your area.
But high school.
And what I will say is this, I was fascinated because I was just kind of like browsing through just to kind of throw away a little time here as I prep. And what I noticed is AJ Epinesa, as he has progressed, has actually regressed into that rotational pass rush specialist. Throughout the years, he has become this guy that you really can only use in a handful of situations. And it's gotten worse as the years progress. And that is just beyond alarming. That to me tells me that maybe he is good in those handful of snaps when the situation is right for a player of his skill set, but he is not in a team and in a unit and a scheme that really can, highlight that and make that happen for him. And because of that, his confidence may get shot at times, and he has regressed into something where you can really only rotate him in for maybe 10, 12 snaps where you actually will see that positive production out of him. His run defending is just god awful. He can't cover, which, look, AJ Epinesa is not supposed to be someone that covers, but I'm just pointing out these other facets where they have tried to use him. He has coverage grades on PFF. He has coverage statistics or lack thereof because they do ask him to do those things. If you're being asked to do something, they're trying to see if you can do it. And he is so poor at it. Like everyone, I feel like I've seen a couple things out there about Boogie Basham. If you really look at Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa, they both deserve criticism in their own right, but they're really good comparables because you can see one guy in Boogie Basham where he is not, a game breaker. He's not someone that can take things over, but at least he can give you an okay enough depth production out of him where he's not going to be a massive problem for you. AJ Epinesa has developed that kind of or lack thereof, developed that problem. And if they're running at him, I am extremely nervous. That edge is not going to be kept. He is going to get absolutely mauled. And next thing you know, that individual that has just blown him up can get to that second level, create the space and stuff like that. And you have become a liability. Every snap he is out there for a run play, you are now down a man. That is never a good thing. Boogie at least has never really seemed, maybe there's been snaps out there, but consistently as a season overall, he was never to that low of a level. And I think that's partially on the player development and coaching, but then there's also just, you're putting a guy like AJ Epinesa where maybe he just cannot be a player in this style of defense in this scheme and do the things that the coaching staff is asking. And honestly, AJ Epinesa is one guy I look at where you really start calling around and being like, hey, I have this second round piece. It's been a couple years. It doesn't seem to be working out. Will someone offer maybe an early day 3 pick, mid day 3 pick for this guy? Because it's just not working out here. And we need to kind of reshuffle things there because it's just not going to happen moving forward. Like that is one piece. You're not going to get anything tangible for him. You're not really going to get much for him, but getting something is better than nothing. And it's just having him on the roster almost becomes more of a liability than anything else. It's somewhat to how you would feel about a Zach Moss, maybe not that low, but it's pretty much becoming that point where it's like, I don't want to see that individual on the field because depending on what this play call comes in at, it's just going to be a disaster. So, that's the one that I really look at. And coming back now to Bean and scouting and things like that, I really think Bean, as much as we talked about earlier with coordinators and stuff and needs to evaluate those individuals, he should really be diving into his scouting staff, really be seeing who has maybe given him very poor advice, giving him a very poor, information set that he's built a board off of, and then kind of attack that and maybe change things up there because wherever he's getting his information from has been very subpar. Like that's how you end up drafting a team that feels like it's just not up to snuff with the best. You have this crown jewel in Josh Allen and nothing around him supporting cast wise. And then maybe these guys don't share a philosophy that you need to have moving forward, where you need to change out these people and get someone else in where hopefully philosophies align, an understanding of what they're trying to achieve is there, and it's going to change moving forward because clearly what you have had in the past and what you currently have in that building right now is just not it. What you have built and put on the field via draft and via other aspects without those blue chip signings like Vaughn, and then the one blue chip that you have found in Josh Allen and trading for Diggs as well, like there is nothing there. It is very bone dry, and you need to change things up because those individuals have put you in that spot if you are Bean.
So I will say on AJ Epinesa's defense, I think he falls under the same umbrella of guys that they just massively screwed up the development of. I don't know if he would have ended up being a great player or not. He weighed 282 in Iowa. They got his weight down to 260 year one. He had that COVID offseason where he couldn't come in. They totally changed his body composition. And I think they screwed up his development from there. They clearly have a type. They look for length in their defensive ends, which one criticism is outside of Von Miller, they don't have anybody else on their defensive end roster that can really bend the edge and win with speed. Greg Rousseau certainly has that athletic upside to do that. He's still working on that. He's kind of almost a physical unicorn in that regard. He can do a little bit of everything, and he's still really growing as a player. I am optimistic about Greg Rousseau, by the way. But Dave, let's talk about Brandon Beane. Where are you at with the Bills GM and maybe more specifically with the development or lack thereof of some of these players?
Well, I think there's a lot of layers to this, and Luka touched on a few of them. I think, we look at a guy like Kyer Elam, and you bring in a physical man corner and just watch his tape. He was physical in college, and you're putting him in a Sean McDermott zone scheme, right? So I'm not quite sure why he didn't see the field. If it was me from the first game of the season, he would have been CB2 or CB1 because Trey was still out, however they wanted to play that out with Dane Jackson. But I think a lot of this has to fall on Sean McDermott, and this might be where I lose the room here because I love Sean McDermott, and I agree with you, Josh. He's going to be here for a while, I think as long as he wants to be because he's one hell of a coach. Talk about the postseason. We can talk about that stuff. We've already hit on that. But you look at guys like Khalil Shakir. Why was he not on the field? When he was asked to make plays, he made plays. Did he have some drops? Yes, but every wide receiver on this roster had drops this season. You look at guys, like James Cook, being, tried to get Jake McKissick, and that fell through. So the next thing he did is he hit the draft, and he got a guy that he thought was a speed weapon for Josh, and that falls on coaching. He wasn't used. He fumbled his first touch in the NFL and never fumbled again the rest of the season. And I'm kind of on the fence with AJ Epinesa. I agree with both of you, actually. I think that there was some of his progression was delayed because they were trying to figure out exactly who he was, body type, what they wanted to do with him. But he's a second round pick. Let's call a spade a spade. He was drafted in the second round by Brandon Beane. So there's expectations there automatically, right? You talk about Boogie Basham. I feel like the role he's in is perfect for him. We were all told during the draft process that he was a pro ready defensive lineman. He was the guy that was pro ready, and he could have been taken over Greg Rousseau. And I think his role is what it is. He comes in when you need him to come in to fill in, and he can make plays. We saw early this season that he was capable of making some plays. But as far as some of these other guys, I mean, Brandon Beane can only do so much. He gives McDermott the players. It's McDermott's job to develop these guys. Now, I'm not saying every draft pick is going to get developed perfectly and they're all going to work out, because it's the draft. It doesn't work that way. There's some guys that you can obviously tell are not going to make this roster. And that's another point too. Like I said, there's so many layers to this and it can go in so many different ways, but the Bills are a really top heavy team. So drafting, especially where they draft 28, 30, 31, these guys might not be starters for a while. Anyways, you know what I'm saying? They're not going to be asked to come in and contribute immediately. All the way back to 2017, they needed Tre'Davious White to start. And obviously that was before Brandon Beane, but you needed Josh Allen. You needed, Tremaine Edmonds. They drafted Matt Milano in 2017. You needed him to get snaps. And things like with the development of Ed Oliver is one thing. Like we saw flashes this year where we were like, man, he's a difference maker. This is his year. He's a difference maker. And then he would disappear for 2-3 games at a time. So again, we have to, if we're going to look at Brandon Beane, I think we need to look, in total, how these guys are being developed. What's their play snaps? It's hard to judge these defensive linemen because they're all put in this rotation, other than obviously Von Miller. He wasn't drafted by the Bills, but Von Miller was a guy who wasn't heavily rotated. Everybody, even the guys they brought in free agency, Daquan Jones and Tim Settle, they were all rotational guys. Shaq Lawson, who, by the way, was probably our best run-stopping defensive end, besides Von Miller this year. If you watch him down the stretch, he performed well. It's hard. It's hard to criticize the draft without criticizing the coaching staff and the development of these guys and putting them in meaningful snaps and continuing to let you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Look at their secondary, all young guys, right? Mm-hmm. They let them start from the beginning. They took their lumps by week 14, 15, 16. They're starting to not make those mistakes again. They're starting to, they've learned by then. They've gotten the snaps. They got the confidence, and the same could have been done with Kyer Elam. Then you draft a guy in Benford, and he's getting reps over Kyer Elam. Now he looked decent until he got injured, and then some things happened down there. But I don't think it's the drafting per se 100%. Now, has there been some picks that you kind of scratch your head, like the Terrell Bernard? Like, we don't know what's going to happen with Tremaine Edmonds. We may get to see a whole bunch of Terrell Bernard this year, but like he hardly played, and he was a 3rd-round pick, and you could have gotten an offensive lineman. You could have got a wide receiver earlier than you drafted Khalil Shakir. You could have done so many other things. So that one's kind of a head scratcher. So, I mean, like I said, there are so many layers to this other than just he's not making good picks, because I think development is huge. And we knew this day where we're at right now with this roster was going to come to where we can't sign everybody. We can't afford everybody. We gave Josh the big contract. That's the one piece that we needed. We got it. He got paid. And now you got big contracts with Dawkins and Trey. Milano's contract's pretty decent. And then, Diggs' contract. And then now what are we going to do with all these other guys? What are we doing with Edmonds? What are we doing with Oliver? There's other guys we're most likely losing Poyer. Hyde's going to be gone after this season. Like what are we doing with all these guys? Now we need these draft picks to start. Hey, they've had a year or two to develop. Now is the time. So I don't know. It's baffled me for the last couple of years why we haven't drafted a wide receiver, why we haven't drafted a safety, or 2 safeties to kind of have a contingency plan for Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Stephon Diggs is is turning 30 this year. What's the contingency plan for a number one wide receiver? We should be grooming that person this season. Probably we should be drafting a wide receiver high so that we can get a guy in here, number 2 wide receiver that could eventually take over the number 1 wide receiver role. So I don't know. There's a lot of layers to it. But like you said, I mean, Brandon Beane has done so many things for this organization. They took him from the cap hell that we were in, got rid of some really bad contracts, and he got us Josh Allen. He worked his ass off to move up the board to get Josh, and then he got Tremaine Edmonds. And there's other pieces in there that are good, but this draft it's got to be, we got to hit on more times than we don't, because these guys are going to be asked to play real soon. So I guess that's my opinion. But like I said, we'd have to talk about the coaching and development. It'd be a bad look if we didn't say, hey, what's the development look like for all these guys? Because I watch all 22. And to answer your question from earlier, I haven't watched the Bengals game yet because I can't stomach watching that. It's going to be so bad. But I've watched all 22, and I've watched, specific games. I'll watch a Gregory Rousseau, AJ Epinesa. I'll watch the guys that don't typically get a ton of snaps and they're in rotational just to kind of see what they do with their time. And it's hit or miss. It's not Rousseau so much, but the other guys, it's hit or miss, especially guys like Dane Jackson. Like how Dane Jackson was starting over Kaiir Elam. After that Cleveland game, it was like game on for opposing quarterbacks. Who's Dane Jackson guarding? We're targeting that guy 12 times a game, and he's going to come up with 100 yards every single game. And Elam played down the stretch, and I thought he played well. I thought he played really well down the stretch, to be honest with you. Imagine how good he would have been if he would have gotten 17 starts. I don't know. Anyways, moving on.
So I will say about Greg Rousseau, there was a nugget in Brandon Beane's press conference that I found interesting and maybe gave me some hope, because Luka, Dave, we all noticed Greg Rousseau's play dipped when Von Miller went out on Thanksgiving. The whole defensive line did. They went from being one of the best defensive lines at creating pressure to one of the worst. And Greg Rousseau went from being in that upper right-hand corner quadrant of pass rush win rate and double team rate to being in that bottom left-hand corner one where you don't want to be. And Brandon Beane did say something very interesting, which was there were a number of guys on the Bills defense this year who obviously got hurt and missed time, but then were playing through injuries down the stretch that really hampered their play level. And I think first we all thought of Jordan Phillips was out there with essentially one shoulder, but the other guy is Greg Rousseau. He did come back from a high ankle sprain. And when you look at the timeline, Von Miller left in the Thanksgiving game against Detroit. The next week, the Bills were in New England, and that was Greg Rousseau's first game back from the high ankle sprain. I'm holding out hope that was the reason why Greg Rousseau's play tailed off. There probably was some absence of Von Miller baked in there too, I'm sure. But I saw so many good things out of Greg Rousseau in the first half of the season before Von Miller went out that I'm holding out hope that Greg Rousseau is going to still be able to get to where we want to get to. Roy has a good question here. Eric Washington's seat getting warm. I don't think so, Roy. I think it should. He's the defensive line coach for those that aren't sure. But Eric Washington is a guy that Sean McDermott was over the moon excited to get into the Bills organization from Carolina. And I think there's a better chance that if and when they move on from Leslie Frazier, Eric Washington is looked at as the next defensive coordinator of this team, then the Bills move on. But you can't argue with the fact that the amount of resources they've pumped into this defensive line under Eric Washington, not just the guys' names we've already named, but you talk about Star Latulele, Mario Addison, Trent Murphy, just huge contracts given out to guys that really didn't do much on this team. I do want to talk about Luka, the development plan. This team, and we talked about some specific ones earlier, but just in general, it feels like there's an arrogance about this team, about the Bills, whether it's McDermott, whether it's Beane, that we are a Super Bowl contender. It's almost insulting to us that you think a rookie can step right into a starting position because our roster is so deep. And I can respect that to a certain extent. But when you look at, like Dave mentioned, with the things going on with Kaiir Elam, we looked at all season long, we see James Cook just getting better and better, but he's still not getting the opportunities. You see how well Christian Benford played out of the box. You talked about the stuff that happened with Greg Rousseau, and just it feels like, yes, your roster is more loaded than most, at least we thought so. But there is still a chance that a rookie you take in the first or second round is better than the player you have at that position. And there was ample opportunity this season for guys like Kaiir Elam, James Cook, Khalil Shakir to get on the field and help. And I don't know if it's because they're hesitant to play rookies. There's always the possibility there's stuff going on behind the scenes that we aren't aware of, that we have to respect what we don't know, or if it's an organizational philosophy of we just don't want our rookies on the field right away, so we're going to look behind every other door before we get to that one.
I think it kind of more so aligns with a philosophy you've seen with other coaching and front offices out there, where the one that comes out to me just because of familiarity is like Bruce Arians in his Cardinals days. Bruce Arians was notorious for not trusting rookies, just flat out not even trusting them. He doesn't trust them to have the mental capacity to grind out an NFL season, understand what they're trying to achieve out there on the field, and kind of go with the punches when things might not be going well. That was kind of like, and he was very open about it. Like BA, I mean, not that it's a surprise to anyone that watches football, was very open with how he felt about rookies and why you would see them be very limited in usage, and only anomalies like David Johnson, when all of a sudden, based on injuries, they had to use him and it just exploded onto the scene. It's like, you can't not play this guy. He clearly is a game changer. Like, those are the things that those are the things that he would look for. Now I bring it back to McDermott. It seems like a similar thing. Unless you blow him away or the coaching staff in front of them, you're not going to see meaningful snaps over again unless injuries just deem it necessary or anything else like that. And you see success with that in previous regimes and other organizations and stuff. It just feels like now this season should be used as a prime example to these guys. If they really want to self-evaluate, if they really want to understand where maybe things went wrong, that is definitely one where maybe they need to change that mindset, because what they believe in veteran, players in the locker room, and if they understand it better than these rookies, is just it's just not it. It's just, that's not how it was working out at a lot of times. And next season, this is where I would love to see change with this. If they kept the same coaching staff, if they tried to preach that we're trying to keep continuity and keep things the same because we believe we're that close to it, the one thing I would love to see change is competition and just understanding that everyone in there, and rookies included, that they bring in this upcoming draft, everyone's got a place on this team. Everyone can get in there and do it, because it was a complete, I almost said failure. I don't want to call it a failure, but it basically is. Like, it was a failure on how they handled all of that. I think the Kaiir Elam usage and the criticism there is very warranted. I think, it's like, look, you can play him underneath Christian Benford, but Christian Benford did nothing to tell me that he didn't deserve to be out there over Kaiir Elam. That might be a little bit of me being, I loved Christian Benford as soon as I saw him. The first time I saw him, I was like, I love this guy. He is just like that. He plays like he is a veteran. So you can understand why McDermott and Frazier and those guys wanted him out there in front of Kaiir, because Kair's kind of learning on the fly, which is good. And I think Dave brought up that great point about Kansas City and how they approached it. There are multiple approaches on how to do things. I just think what the Bills have tried to do with this previous rookie class and even classes before then is kind of just not working, and it's stalling out the team a bit. And now you just need to have open competition, even with those rookies going into the season. This isn't just something you should do in training camp in, the first or second or third preseason game. This is something that should happen on the fly during the season. If your play is dropping off, if you are becoming any sort of a liability and there's a guy just biting at the bit to get out there, let him go. Like, make it happen. You have to be proactive in those decisions. And I think that's maybe where McDermott, Frazier, Dorsey, whoever ends up making those decisions with personnel on either side of the ball, maybe where they fall short. They kind of fall in a comfortable place where they just want to lead on veterans, want to lead on the knowns, what they have in front of them, and just not kind of feel like they need to be proactive in changing something because what they think they have in front of them is good enough, or just they at least know what they have in front of them, rather than this rookie, this young gun that they really have a lot of unknown with and don't know how he's going to progress moving forward. They seem to struggle with understanding that balance, and I would love to see some sort of change in that regard with them moving forward. Will that happen? I mean, that's just me sitting in, this room right now in my house, just being objective on this, but like I would love to see them kind of change that thought and really, because that's been happening. The league is getting younger. All sports are getting younger. It's just happening because I think what sometimes people are blinded by is thinking that veterans can win you games and that's what you need to lean on because they understand more about the game. But all sports, not even just football, are becoming more and more freakishly athletic. And these younger guys are just able to keep up with the speed, keep up with the tempo of the game sometimes, where a Dane Jackson, a Xavier Rhodes, all these guys just don't have it in them anymore. And they need to be mentally sharp every single play in order to kind of recover and just be in the position they need to be in. Whereas maybe Kyer Elam is so athletically gifted, and by maybe, I mean, he is pretty athletically gifted, that he can make those game-changing plays for you, even if he screwed up the play before. Like, he has the athletic ability to do things. And if you can build that confidence on top of it, watch out. Like, maybe all of a sudden we'd be talking a completely different show tonight because you trusted that rookie rather than, I'm not saying Kyer Elam would have changed the game either. Like, look, anything we talk about here tonight, we were getting beat.
It's big picture. It's not Bengals.
Yeah, this big picture. Like, we were getting beat Sunday. That was there was no outcome of that game where we weren't going out there with a loss. So, but yes, I would love to see something different. I would love to see them just trust, or lack thereof, their veterans somewhat, and let open competition happen more so, and maybe let younger guys present themselves in this team and get some meaningful snaps more so that maybe they can show them that they are deserving to be out there regularly and elevate this team even more so. And also, just real quick, I would love to see that mindset change more on the offensive side, and maybe bring in a lot of youth on the offensive side and change things up a ton over there and just get something different over there, because defensively, you got what you got now. You need to try to make that work as best as you can.
You mentioned a name, and I do want to talk about drafting for offense here next, but you mentioned a name that really kind of triggered something in my brain, Christian Benford. And there was a point in the preseason and early in this season that it looked like the Bills had struck gold in the 6th round with Christian Benford. He looked every bit the part of a starting cornerback in this league. Super technically sound, never out of place, not the best athlete in the world, but did not look out of water and in that role that the Bills put him in. And for whatever reason, when they were determined to rotate Benford and Elam, there was never a rotation there with Dane Jackson. It was always Dane Jackson's going to play. This is before Trey White came back. And then Benford and Elam are going to rotate on the other side for whatever reason. And then Dane Jackson had the serious injury, what we thought was very serious, week 2 against Tennessee. And it forced the Bills to start Elam and Benford against the Dolphins in week 3. We all know how explosive the Dolphins are, and the Bills shut them down that game, absent a very poor play by Jaquan Johnson that allowed Jalen Waddle to get behind the defense. The Bills defense did very well that game, down a lot of their starters, their entire secondary. Benford and Elam both played very well that game. And it's just, when you don't allow your rookies to have prominent roles, when you always are, they have to be babied, they have to split snaps. Cody Ford has to split snaps with Ty Nsekhe. Benford, no matter how good he looks in training camp, he looks like our best cornerback in training camp, he's got to be the one to split snaps with Kyer Elam. It's not about who the best player is, it's about who's got most tenure on this team. It drives me nuts, because the Seattle Seahawks in the 5th round drafted a cornerback named Tariq Woolen, and they struck gold with him. And I think he's maybe a Pro Bowler. He's in the conversation for Defensive Rookie of the Year, and they have their answer at corner very cheap for the next 5 years. The Bills may have done the exact same thing with Christian Benford, and we won't know until maybe next year, because they refuse to let their players shine. If they're the best players, they should play. And if they're even close to being the best players, err on the side of the young guy that you haven't been seeing getting burnt all over the field like you saw with Dane Jackson. That annoys me. I know Luka put his head down with Tariq Woolen because we both loved him so much. We would have both put him in the 1st round with the Bills. And I do want to talk about something Costa said here real quick. This feels like it's slowly turning into a Green Bay situation where they're overly relying on A-Rod and provide him no help. It's absolutely turning into a Green Bay situation for now. Like, they can totally get out of this, but they did the exact same thing the Packers did this offseason. They watched their number 2 receiver, Emmanuel Sanders, their number 3 receiver, Cole Beasley, leave, and they watched John Feliciano they released John Feliciano, they released Darrell Williams, And they did nothing to supplement that. It was, hey, Isaiah McKenzie, you're our 4th wide receiver. Now you're our 3rd wide receiver. Hey, Gabe Davis, you're our 5th wide receiver. Now you're our 2nd wide receiver. Hey, Ken Dorsey, you're our quarterback coach. Now you're our offensive coordinator if you want that. Ryan Bates, you're our swing offensive lineman. Now you're our starting right guard. All the changes on offense, absence for Roger Saffold, were just promotions from within. You saw they went out and spent a mega contract on Von Miller. They spent their 1st round pick on a defensive back in Kyer Elam. They paid big money for Daquan Jones, who I think is the 27th highest paid defensive tackle in the league. They paid money for Tim Settle. They brought back Jordan Phillips. They put all their assets on defense. The same philosophy with Green Bay, thinking that whatever's around Josh Allen, he can make it work. Let's put a championship level defense out there, and our team's going to be hard to beat. The problem is the offense regressed, and the defensive players you picked up weren't as good as you thought. Well, they were fine, but it was the draft picks that they came in with that really let you down. All right. We vented a lot tonight. Is there anything that we haven't touched on? How about you, Dave? I know there's a lot of things in your mind about this Bills team. You said that we probably could have just turned your mic on and let you vent for a couple hours. And, you've got some venting out, but is there anything we haven't touched on tonight that you want to get off your chest about these Buffalo Bills?
A couple points to Luka's, what Luka was talking about with the progression in developing these players. This is the same coaching staff for the most part, besides Rick Dennison. He's gone. This is the same coaching staff that didn't start Josh Allen from day one and thought that Nate Peterman was going to be a better choice. Brandon Beane came out and said that, and Sean McDermott said, this is something that we're going to learn from. And this is absolutely something. As much time, effort, draft capital that you spent to go get Josh Allen, when he walks off the stage, you hand him the clipboard and say, get in the film room. You're starting day one. Here's the keys to the castle. Because that's who they thought he was, right? Now, wherever you lean on the fence of start a guy from day one, let a guy sit for a while and learn, you had Nate Peterman and Derek Anderson for him to learn from. So, come on. Another point, down the stretch, and I'm going to ask both you guys, who do you think the best two cornerbacks on this team was? Because I can tell you one of them is not named Tre'Davious White. It's Kyer Elam and Christian Benford. I think should have been starting, because I don't know. Trey had some moments. Don't get me wrong. Everybody loves Tre'Davious White, and I think that there's still some stuff in his head psychologically that's going on. But there was times when Trey was getting beat bad. Not on the same level as Dane Jackson, but I feel like Christian Benford and Kyer Elam should have been getting, especially against teams like the Lions, games against the Bears. Like, those teams are going to tear you apart in the passing game. I mean, let's maybe the Lions, but let's be real. There's legitimate concern from me about Tre'Davious White. Again, this goes back to me watching all 22. I'm a little concerned about where he's going to be back. Now, he's got a full offseason with the team. He's got training camp and all that stuff to get better. And we also have to remember, too, side note, Von Miller, we don't know how he's going to come back. He's not 25-year-old Von Miller. He's older, aging. Now, he's a freak. He's a specimen. We get that. But some things we're not just going to expect Von Miller to be dynamic Von Miller, I don't think, from the jump. So, but a few things that I wanted to get off my chest, I got off my chest. I feel a lot better about. But this team has some work to do. And this, like you both have said, this is going to be a critical offseason for Brandon Beane. This is going to be, are you okay with what we have to offer? Are you going to change up the menu? Are you going to make it a little bit more spicy? Are you going to make it a little bit more like, are we going to be oohed and awed with, some of the decisions that you make? And I'm not talking about splashy free agent signings. I'm talking about guys that are already on contract. Can we figure out a way to either restructure, move on from those contracts, whatever it is, to try to get the right guys in here? Because I don't want to become the Green Bay Packers and have Josh Allen have bloody elbows every friggin' week because he's running for his life. Like, we need to fix the offensive line and get some weapons around him. Brandon Beane obviously down the stretch realized that there was a problem on offense. He wouldn't have went out and got John Brown off the street and Cole Beasley off the street if he didn't realize that there was something wrong. There was not enough things for Josh at his disposal. And at that point in time, it was too late to do anything else. The trade deadline had already passed, and so I don't know. It concerns me when your head coach says that I wish that we would have used Naheem Hines more. Well, tell your offensive coordinator who reports to you to install him in the offense. Like that kind of disconnect stuff kind of irritates me. So hopefully this is stuff that we hear. They're going to actually, we're going to actually see them say, well, we're going to learn from it. Well, we need to start learning from this. We've been hearing we need to learn from this for 3 years now. So let's learn from it and let's move on. I'm off the soapbox. That's it for me.
Okay, Luka, we got to put that one back up because you saw me get triggered. The Packers won a Super Bowl. Yes, they did back in 2010, Sean. And look, I'm not mad at you. If the Bills win one Super Bowl in my lifetime, I will be thrilled. And I'm jealous of Packers fans. They got to see it. But the build of that Packers team that won that Super Bowl is not the Packers team now that completely ignores their offense, expects Aaron Rodgers to be Superman, and drafts nothing but defense. They actually got out of character, signed a free agent like Charles Woodson. They had Jordy Nelson. Was it Greg Jennings, Luka, in that Super Bowl? I think it was. Like they had a very high-end tandem of receivers, maybe even Jermichael Finley. They were loaded. There was no issues with the Packers putting weapons around Aaron Rodgers. To your question, Dave, I will say I do think Tre'Davious White was one of the two best cornerbacks for the Bills down the stretch. One, because Christian Benford just went away. He got injured and then was never given a jersey again on game day, which irritates me. He probably would have played well, but we unfortunately just didn't get to see it. I'll let Lucas speak on what he'd been warning us all about with Tre'Davious White all season long. Like if you're just waiting for the Bills to inject an all-pro cornerback into this defense, you're going to be let down. I'll let him talk about that. But I will say that I saw the same thing you saw. He definitely had lost a step and he was not trusting his knee. But I saw some encouraging signs beginning with the last game of the season against New England. It looked like he finally started to get some of those confidence back in the ball skills. Like he made an interception on a ball that was intended for Devontae Parker. And then in the game against Miami, you really saw him have more confidence on the outside. And then my second pick would have been Kaiir Elam. I don't think the Bills employed a great cornerback last year. I don't think they're going to have a great cornerback next year unless Kaiir Elam or Benford take off. And it sounds like Benford could actually be going to safety at this point. But I think Tre'Davious White at this point is on the decline. Maybe he's still a solid starter, but I think that's probably good enough to be the top two for what the Bills had out there. Where are you at with that, Luka?
Yeah. I was not. I'm going to be really, really polite to Trey White because he deserves for me to be polite. I saw this, as you might have hinted. I kind of saw the writing on the wall with this. Like they always say, there's three positions that an ACL can really affect the most. And two of them are wide receiver corner for a reason. They're very, very quick twitch. The other being edge, which also you brought up, Dave, earlier with Von Miller, due to a lot. It's just like there's a lot going on there. But going back to wide receiver and corner, there's a lot of quick twitch. There's a lot of movement, and it's happening at the fastest it can on that football field. And Trey coming back from that late into a season where it seemed like probably that recovery was not as smooth as it could have been potentially. The writing was on the wall that him physically was not going to be anything to be relied on, at least is a way to put it. And if anyone had an idea or if anyone inside the Bills organization had that hope and idea, I am very, very, very worried about them. And I question them and how they think about this stuff. But even outside as fans, that shouldn't have been something. I think the hope was there, but I think, again, it kind of goes to with, how we thought about this team preseason to now where we are. The one thing is you're blinded by the hype. You're blinded by the potential and the ceiling of this team. And reality is, look, this is something that's going to majorly affect him physically. And to your point, Josh, you brought up in that New England game and then again in the Dolphins playoff game, you could see that maybe mentally the confidence was there. The ability that he understood what was happening in front of him was there. It's just, again, it was almost like his head was way ahead of his body. Like it was just like mentally he was already draped over Jalen Waddle, but then he realized he was 3 steps behind him and he needed to get moving real quick. And that knee just isn't quite there. I also believe that the days of seeing lockdown Trey White is definitely gone. It's over. Like you cannot come back from that ACL injury and ever be a first team all pro shutdown corner anymore. Unfortunately, like I hope to be wrong on that point, and I don't hope to be wrong a lot, but I hope to be wrong on that point. But the reality is it's just almost borderline impossible to get back to that level physically after that severe of an injury. So it's like, I don't necessarily agree with Dave as well. I think Trey, just because of what you had available, and then the point of just Benford was never even being handed a jersey. So something is clearly there. And I would imagine it's somewhat injury related and then other things just going on. It's just Kaiir Elam needed to be playing more. And, you know, it just something was going on down the stretch that it just wasn't as much as we hoped. And then Trey White, like just by default, was your corner two in my mind. Like, what else are you going to do? Like you, as we've talked about, you have Dane Jackson, and then you're going to lean on Cam Lewis, who you've been converting to a poor man safety. Like you had no other options, but if you're in that predicament, that is not good. You can't have a 75% at best physically, 90% mentally, all pro corner that's just not going to do it for you, opposite of a rookie who then your third option is a rookie who's too hurt. And then your actual third option, who you're making a second option, is Dane Jackson, who is just getting torched by Amari Cooper, as Dave pointed out in Cleveland, and then everyone else under the sun. Like this is like bottom 8 cornerback room in the league. That's not good. You can't have that, especially in a defense that's so dependent on coverage and not pressure. Like that's not good. So it was just the unfortunate, like, multiple things happening on defense going into this corner discussion that I personally, my answer to Dave's question is Kaiir and Trey, I guess, but my real answer is no one. Like there was no one that I would even sit here and tell you was our best corner, because I don't think anyone played good enough to really deserve for me to say that person should be out there 100%. They all had their flaws, and then we weren't able to do anything to kind of disguise that in any capacity. So I don't care who they threw out there. You were going to see problems with them all. Trey, Dane, Kaiir, Benford, if he was healthy, Cam Lewis, even. I don't care. They were all going to show flaws, some more than others, but really there's too many flaws and too many problems that they were presenting you that eventually you're going to get got. And that bill came in the divisional round against the Bengals.
I will say that is another knock against Leslie Frazier, because one thing we've always said about Frazier and McDermott is they have maximized their defensive backs. Jordan Poyer was a completely under the radar, who is that free agent signing that turned into an all pro under McDermott and Frazier. Micah Hyde was considered a good player in Green Bay. He became an all pro here. Tre'Davious White was not a high end prospect when the Bills took him. In fact, most people had him rated as a second round pick, turned into be an all pro player. Taron Johnson, who, by the way, we are aware Taron Johnson is a cornerback. He is not part of this conversation. He is rock solid at nickel, and he is fantastic to watch. He is a joy to watch, but he's not part of what we're talking about with the boundary corners. And then you just look at what they've done with guys like Levi Wallace, who was an undrafted free agent that was a solid starter for years to come. You almost just expected the fact that, oh, wow, you hand Frazier and McDermott, 2 rookies who are both flashing early. Like, this is going to be great. And then it just never panned out. And what happened? And obviously, you can't just expect them to bat 1,000. Like, that's not going to be the case. But it is disappointing that ends up being what happened. There was a question here from Roy. Beasley said he wants to come back. What do you think? I think, Roy, there are 3 receivers on this team that are going to be for sure in camp next year. Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Khalil Shakir. After that, it's anyone's guess. Isaiah McKenzie has a contract they can very much get out of. I don't necessarily need them to do that, but I am at the point where I kind of want to see them reshuffle the bottom of the wide receiver depth chart. And it feels like they've maximized everything they can do with Isaiah McKenzie. I would expect him to be a New York Giant the nanosecond he is cut from the Bills to go be that weapon for Brian Daboll again. Cole Beasley, I don't mind the idea. I thought he was fine when thrown to this year. It's not the Cole Beasley we saw in 2020 when he was an all-pro, and that's fine, but he's still that reliable underneath target. They need to rebuild this wide receiver depth chart. I expect 1 or 2 free agent, or not, 1 or 2 draft picks. There was a question earlier about Jacoby Myers and Alan Lazard. That may have actually been you, Roy. I apologize for missing it. The chat's been going kind of fast tonight, but no interest in Alan Lazard. They already have Alan Lazard on their team. They just call him Gabe Davis. Jacoby Myers is interesting. I think he has a lot of skills that would fit well in this offense, but with as bad as this free agent wide receiver class is, I think there's going to be a lot of overpays for guys like DJ Chark, Jacoby Myers, where you could get some fool's gold there. And I don't necessarily want the Bills to dip their toe in that, where you're committing real big money to guys that aren't game changers. A name I will tell you that's interesting to me is Paris Campbell, because he's been injured for a lot of his career. He has a speed element. He finally stayed healthy this year for the Colts and really had a solid season, even though they had absolutely nothing at quarterback. If he's willing to take a team-friendly prove-it deal to latch on to a quarterback like Josh Allen, I could see that being appealing. But with all the injuries the Bills had this year, I don't know if they'd even be interested in a guy like Paris Campbell, who hasn't been able to stay healthy. I don't know. I don't want to be the only one answering the Cole Beasley question. I know he's a polarizing topic. I thought he was fine. I didn't have super high expectations. I thought he was reliable. Dave, where are you at with Cole Beasley? Do you want to see him back?
Yeah, but I don't think that they're going to do it. I think that Cole Beasley is at a place where he realizes that he's not Cole Beasley of 2019, 2020, the guy that helped Josh's progression like a lot more than people give him credit for. I think he's lost a step. I'm not saying he can't come in for some meaningful snaps here and there, but we forgot about OBJ.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're going to do it. But there's always going to be that link with Von Miller and all that stuff being put out there. And we obviously saw that nobody wanted to mess with him after the medical stuff and the weird airplane thing came out. But he's going to be out there and someone's going to bite on him. And I don't know if he's willing now with all this stuff, off-field stuff that's happened, if he's willing to take a 1-year prove-it deal or what's going to happen with him. And I know somebody will probably throw money at him. But he's got a relationship now with Brandon Beane. You know, they've spoken a few times and he's got that relationship with Vaughn. So I don't know if that's something that's out there. We don't even know what we would get. He hasn't played football in over a year. So that's just something out there. I will say though, that Jacoby Myers is very intriguing for me. Again, it's all based off of money, right? This is probably one of the worst wide receiver free agent classes that there's been in a while. So there's going to be teams that are going to overspend, like Christian Kirk's crazy contract that he got last year. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think they need to do something because Gabe Davis is not the answer at wide receiver 2 for sure. And there needs to be more targets for Khalil Shakir. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what Brandon Beane's philosophy this offseason is, because he seems to kind of shift back and forth. He listens to the masses, I think, and he listens to some others around the league. And I think that it seems like he tries to fix things when it's a known issue. Like hopefully this year it's going to be offensive line in the draft and then add weapons throughout the league somehow if he can. So we'll see though. Oh, and I do want to point out, did you guys see where I led you in that cornerback conversation? I led you guys right down that path. I'm concerned about our cornerback roster for next season. I'm very concerned because that is typically, I should say, our secondary. That has been the Bills' strong suit for 6 years. We had Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, no pun intended, the safety blanket. And then other guys were able to work in, we had Levi Wallace at CB2. We clamored for a new CB2 for 3 years. We got one, and Trey's injury. So it's going to be very interesting to see what they're going to do scheme-wise to replace Jordan Poyer if he does not come back. I know that Christian Benford played some safety in college, but I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you, like, we have an entire offseason ahead of us. Luka is going to get so tired of hearing me say this. Stokes is going to get so tired of hearing me say this when we're all on shows together. But when it comes to the defense, my mindset is you got what you got. You have all these investments in the defensive line. If you want to talk about injuries, you have a Von Miller and Micah Hyde coming back from injury. You have another year off of the ACL for Tre'Davious White. We just had the conversation, but I think you have to at least hope he's got a little bit more spring in his step the next year. You have Christian Benford and Kyer Elam in their second year. You have been developing Cam Lewis. I could barely even get that sentence out. I mean, if you want to sprinkle in a couple day 3 picks in the secondary to bolster some things up, if you lose Tremaine Edmonds, it gets tricky. But You made your bed with Terrell Bernard. It's time to see what it can amount to. This defense has been an abomination in the playoffs the last 3 years. So if that means you have to put Terrell Bernard at middle linebacker, you're trusting Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa and Greg Rousseau on the defensive line, and you have to trust these young corners to handle it on the outside, it's hard to imagine it's any worse than what we've seen these last 3 years. There has to be an organizational shift to flooding the offense with assets. They have to protect Josh Allen better. It was an embarrassment at times, particularly at tackle, and they have to get him more weapons. Dave mentioned Diggs is 30 years old. Gabe Davis is going into the last year of his rookie deal. Are you in a hurry? I'm talking to anybody out there watching. Are you in a hurry to lock him up to a long-term deal right now? I absolutely am not. And then after that, you have Khalil Shakir, who couldn't get on the field this year. So they need to have at least 2 rookies coming in from this draft, a very high pick rookie, at least day 2, hopefully day 1. I'd be cool with 2 day 2 picks at rookie wide receiver and just see what happens. Look what the Steelers did last year. Follow their model. They took George Pickens in round 2 and Calvin Austin was at round 4, Luka. Like they never have themselves shorthanded at wide receiver. They got rid of Juju, and then George Pickens comes in. They have Deontay Johnson, and they just keep shuffling them in. And right now, the Bills need to find a way to keep adding weapons. And the fact that we have an entire season's gone by where they've been desperately screaming for a wide receiver, and we still really have no idea about the rapport Josh Allen has with Khalil Shakir because he couldn't get on the field is maddening. Although I will say I'm very encouraged by the trust balls that Josh Allen was throwing him. I see some Gabe Davis questions in chat. Costa brought up Darius Slayton, which, I mean, if we want a wide receiver who can go deep and not catch the ball, we already have that in Gabe Davis. So I don't think we need Darius Slayton. Luka, you were admittedly lower on Davis than me coming into the year. Have you written him off completely as a guy who can be the long-term answer at wide receiver too, or is there still a shred of hope in your mind?
I haven't written him off. I'm not going to write off a guy that young. I think that would be foolish. What I will say is this year just proved that projections are projections, and like you can't assume that everyone develops. Like you can't assume that every player comes in and will naturally take the next step up the stairway and progress forward and in a positive direction. Like regression can happen, plateauing can happen, and falling off a shelf can happen. And I'm not saying Gabe Davis fell off a shelf or anything like that. I just think you propelled a guy from a role that was really kind of that flashy wide receiver 3 at wide receiver 2 positioning into the steady wide receiver 2 role. And he proved that the reality was he wasn't ready for it. He doesn't have whatever it is to fill that role for this team and in this offense. And I don't know necessarily if it's kind of a clear-cut answer on why that was the case. I just think Gabe Davis as a player is someone that you, of course, are going to utilize and try to see what you can do with yet another season. I just think maybe a conversation needs to be had with him, and just reality needs to be given and shown to Davis that it's like, hey, this is your career year. Like this is a make it or break it year for you. And you could really find yourself in your own career at a real pass if you do not put in the work, put in the time. And I'm not saying he hasn't, but this is a kind of show it season now coming up for him. And I'm not thinking that the Bills are going to kind of give him the entire season of reigns. They don't have a reason to. This is kind of going to be, I'm not going to say a short leash season, but maybe they kind of go back to where he was kind of utilized at his best. And he is not going to be a regularly 80% of this offensive snaps kind of guy anymore. They need to find someone else that can fill those snaps and maybe bring something else to the table, however that is. I just don't think maybe Gabe Davis can be that regular opposite wide receiver 2 yet. You need to kind of get him comfortable, get him the confidence back, because you would see it again in flashes. And of course, the playoff Gabe stuff was happening, whatever. But God, but what I will say is it's still in there in him to make big plays and be a big time player. It's just maybe something you have to figure out if it's going to always be inconsistent, or if he just needs to build a little bit more confidence and maybe just age like a fine wine rather than a beer you just want to crack open and chug. Like, you need to kind of maybe figure that one out. And then if he's neither, and he's just kind of that role player, you definitely obviously now are at a point where you can figure that one out. And you hopefully, as you pointed out, drafted enough capital in the wide receiver room that you can just let him walk and figure out his own path and move on accordingly. Like, this is going to be a fascinating year that I really think that you really need to kind of sit him down, understand we're going to pull you back a little bit here. We're going to try to figure it out, maybe get you into a more comfortable role. And if he can elevate his game from there, maybe he warrants some sort of contract to continue on this team. But if he cannot bring it up from a role that you've already seen him in flashes succeed at, you have to move on from that point in time. The catching, as you just brought up here, it's just like, I said catching, the dropping is definitely alarming. It just seems like at times that he's almost his head and his hands are doing two different things. It's not what he needs to do in order to catch the ball at times. It's so awkward that it's obvious and it's in front of everyone. And yet there's no real answer on how to correct that. It's just seems like it's almost like the yips in golf. It seems like it's just something that's happening in front of you. It's causing poor results, but you don't know what you need to do to correct it. It's just one of those weird things going on. Maybe they just need to pull him back, bring him into a comfort space, bring him into a spot that he knows he can succeed at, and elevate himself from there. If you can't do it, you have to move on. That's just the reality of it. That's the business side of it. And it wasn't surprising to me to see what you saw this year out of him. There was just a hope that maybe he could, elevate and become that solid wide receiver too. And it just never came to fruition. It's just, that's not who he is as a player at this point in time. And just, we wanted to believe something that wasn't real.
Can I add something real quick, Josh, before you go?
Go for it. Go for it.
I think we know who Gabe Davis is. I think he's a wide receiver 3 or 4. If you look back to his rookie season, how many times did we see wide open Gabe Davis touchdowns? Mm-hmm. Because there was supporting casts around him. There was Diggs, there was Brown, there was Beasley in 2020. 2021, there was Emmanuel Sanders, Diggs, Beasley. So the Chiefs game, he was just getting wide open looks. I'm not saying that Gabe Davis is not a reliable receiver, but he's not a wide receiver 2 target reliable receiver. There is definitely a role on this team for him. And like Luka was saying, I think if you stash him during the game and you bring him out maybe in red zone situations, or you need a tough third down, or, it's going to be a shootout type game, then you bring him in certain packages. I think that's who Gabe Davis is. He's definitely not a wide receiver 2. He's even come out and said that the form that he uses to catch the ball is so unconventional that it causes him to drop balls. He said that. He clearly said that in an interview, and he even showed how he holds his hands. And it's one of those things where the Bills and Brandon Beane thought that he, like Isaiah McKenzie, they thought that he was more than he actually was. And I hope they look at the results and they realize that it's time to improve and move on and go from there.
I'm with you. I saw a question in there about Isaiah Hodgins. I will just say, I think I like what I saw from Isaiah Hodgins down the stretch. Let's not forget how depleted the Giants wide receiver group was. What he got in New York was something he wasn't going to get in Buffalo, which was volume. I think there's a chance that he winds up being a very good weapon for them. But I think there's also a chance maybe he's just a Robert Foster, who Brian Dable is a great offensive mind. He can draw up plays, and he decided to feature the one guy in his offense who could get open down the stretch. I expect the Giants to load up on some receivers this offseason. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Isaiah Hodgins. Speaking of the offseason, we are now kind of turning our attention to the offseason. And Dave, now that we have you on, is there anything you would like to say to the Built in Buffalo audience about what they can expect from the Built in Buffalo podcast network, the live show? Is there anything you want to say about what the content is going to look like going into the offseason?
Yeah, I think like most Bills fans, we're kind of regrouping right now. The offseason typically is a time for us to kind of look at our previous year's performance, like most Bills fans are with the Bills right now. But we are going to be doing some new things. We're going to be moving some things around. I'll be bringing back Billsology. That'll be coming back with me and Akeem. I'm going to have a show called Off the Edge. Spoiler alert, I'm going to have my own live show. That's going to be, I haven't picked the day yet. We're going to work that in. Our guy Stokes, we're going to try to get him a lot more involved. I know I love him. He's very passionate about the team. Josh has been doing these pre-recorded videos that seem to be working out really well. The Bills Chat guys, their podcast will continue to crank out. and then Built in Buffalo Live. And then we'll have some other stuff mixed in. We got Peter still. We got the sit down. We have some other stuff coming. A Rich is coming back. He's going to have his own show. So we got a lot of stuff lined up. We'll get all of that logistics of all that stuff worked out here in the next couple of weeks, but we're going to take some time to kind of get through what everybody else is getting through, and try to line up the off season. But we'll keep it rolling. There's a lot of stuff that's going to continuously go on Facebook, YouTube. We're going to try to get into TikTok if we can figure out how that whole platform works. We're going to try to get in there, and Twitter, of course. But yeah, stick with us all off season. We'll have free agency stuff. We're going to have the draft stuff. We'll have all of the stuff coming up for training camp and stuff like that. So just stick it here. We'll try to keep you up to speed on all the news and everything going on with the Bills. And thank you for everybody that supported us all year long. It was a good season. It was a tough ending. Our Facebook page is probably going to hit 100,000 followers here in the next month, which is insane. So all the diehards there. YouTube, our new channel, we're trying to get to 1,000. That's our first goal. We're about 175-ish away from there. And Twitter's always growing. So follow these guys on Twitter. These guys do a great job on Twitter as well. I know Josh, I think, is the one over there running their page. He's constantly putting content out. These guys have a podcast, one of our best podcasts that drops Monday mornings. They do all the reactions and stuff after games, but off season they'll be hitting all that stuff too. So just stay on the lookout for everything. I appreciate you guys having me on. It's been a while. I was semi-retired for about almost 2 years. So this was nice to come on and talk football, even though it was kind of a vent session, a little bit of some therapy. But yeah, you guys rock, and the show's doing well. So keep up the good work, and I appreciate everybody supporting us, and go Bills.
Go Bills. Nothing like a very heartbreaking Bills ending to their season to get your juices flowing for wanting to vent about them on a podcast. Looking forward to what you have in store, Dave. Excited for Billsology, and then your Edge podcast you talked about, that or live show you talked about, that should be good. For Luka, I am Josh. We can't thank Dave enough for being on with us this week. Luka and I will be back right in this exact same spot next week, and we will see you then.